Good morning. My name is Andrew Cameron. I'm an enterprise architect at General Motors. Really pleased to be here. I actually was a speaker at the very first Cloud Identity Summit, which was in Keystone, Colorado. It was not the conference that it is today, but I'm really excited to be here, and congratulations to the team for how they brought this conference to where it is today. So today I'm going to speak about some of the things we're doing at General Motors, how we're evolving our identity architecture to support the customer experience. I think it's important to note with this picture, it's not just a cool picture, it is a strategic goal. Someday you will see a vehicle, you may have seen some already, but you will see a consumer vehicle that won't have a steering wheel. That is part of our future. There we go. So, our CEO, Mary Barra, said about 3 years ago that the pace of change in the automotive industry is really accelerated to a point where the next 5 years would experience more change in the auto industry than the previous 50. And I think some of the things that we're doing and a lot of things that have occurred in the industry are really indicative of that. We've really transformed GM now from a auto manufacturer to now we are really going to be focusing on as a transportation services company, right? If you need any evidence of that, go and take a look at the valuation of Cruise these days. It's really interesting. So it's really something that has really transformed the entire company, and the focus on being able to really build the highest quality customer experience has been something that I've been enjoyed being a part of, and so we're going to talk about some of that from an architectural perspective of what we're building today. So, as I mentioned, we're more about connecting vehicle services to the customer, and what's important there is now it's more than just cars, right? Now, if you may be familiar with our Maven platform, you may be familiar with how you interact with GM vehicles through our mobile apps. You may have heard that we're now going to be building and selling e-bikes. So there's just a huge amount of services that are being brought to the customer, and to be able to bring these services to the customer, it's going to be really important to have a consistent, secure experience in the background, right? Just as Andre mentioned in the keynote, identity and security should be invisible, but it needs to be present. It needs to be something that is protecting the customer in their journeys at all times. And be able to do that, there's really kind of three main scenarios that we want to be able to support. We want to identify a customer. We need to be able to have a simple and secure way for a customer to identify themselves. And then once we identify them, we want to be able to know who they are to us. And so that means whether they own multiple vehicles, whether they have multiple family members, all of these things are critical to understanding how to provide the customer experience. And then on the third aspect of this is be able to provide personalized services, be able to provide acknowledgement that you're a loyal customer, be able to provide the ability to transfer preferences from one vehicle or product to another. All of these are critical to providing a high quality customer experience. And then if you take note of the enablers that are in the IT background here, there's also things like establishing and managing a global customer identifier. There's also things like being able to manage a consistent set of profile attributes to be able to have the customer recognized the same way to all of our back-end services. So from an architecture perspective, it's really important to focus, we believe, on a few core components. Obviously, and I'll get into identity, and it's really critical across everything that you do with the customer now, and how you support that from an IT perspective has evolved, right? It's changed from the days of standing up massive servers of infrastructure in the background to support identity functions. Now there's a lot more options for corporations to support that. Profile, very key. I'll be getting into that in a bit more depth. Preferences are also, and these are services that generally you may have built into your systems, and now what the recommendation here is that we want to abstract these services from your back-end applications and present them as a core set of capabilities that all of your applications in the enterprise can leverage. And obviously, intelligence is a very huge component as well. As your customers are interacting with your systems, they're generating critical information to help you understand how to best provide services for them. And obviously, the whole goal here is to provide that seamless experience across services that you provide today and any that you bring on in the near future. So let's talk about identity. I think if you listen to anything in terms of where we're moving from a technology perspective, cloud identity is something that is it's here to stay. And the message here is that if you are really planning to provide customer services that need to scale to possibly millions of customers, that it's the challenge in providing that with an on-prem set of services is getting higher. And so if you just look at the comparison, some of the benefits you get from the IDaaS platforms, the fact that you don't have the software maintenance issue, the fact that you don't have the installation and infrastructure issues when dealing with the cloud services, those are really critical in being able to be agile, right? To be able to pivot and add additional features in your platform to be able to better provide that customer experience. So where we were previously in managing massive LDAP infrastructures to be able to provide services to our customers, I think we've evolved. I think the cloud services, there's a number of leading IDaaS providers. They're all here this week. You should, if you're not already on that journey, you might want to take a look at it. The recommendation here is to leverage that as the identity portion of your architecture. There's also plenty of knowledge around about how critical it is to protect that infrastructure, how critical it is to protect your customer information. If you haven't gone out to the service called Have I Been Owned, you might want to do it. It's just a year ago, the number was around 3 or 4 billion credentials that they have been managing, and that number has just jumped up to 7, maybe even 8 by now. The message here is simple. Attacks will come often, and you will have to be able to prepare to secure your customers' information and your corporate information from that. And if you're not, and again, rolling out things like MFA to your customers is a tricky proposition. You don't want to provide friction in that user journey, but it is a solid, provable metric to secure your customer accounts is enabling MFA with your digital experience. We'll get into that a bit more coming forward. So as I mentioned, the IDaaS platforms are becoming better at protecting your customer information. And the way that generally works is that there are signals that are in the environment, and whether it's a compromised credential, whether it is a suspicious IP address from botnets, whether it's part of a denial of service attack, all of these signals are important to be able to recognize them and then respond to them as you interact with your customer. And by doing that, you can set risk, you can set various actions that occur once you detect these signals, and be able to ask your customer to do a password reset if that's what it takes, or if there's some other action that you feel that they should take. And building these capabilities is although there are products and plenty of them that do it, the IDaaS platforms are adding this as a capability in what they provide. And it's, again, the proposition of building these capabilities and then managing it internally versus using the IDaaS platform to take advantage of it. It becomes a pretty compelling case. Again, Andre mentioned this again in the keynote. If you're not, for some reason, using standards, you really should be. And it's really not an option anymore. You really should be looking at OpenID Connect to authenticate your services. I put SAML up there. SAML is still oldie but goodie, I think I heard somebody say. And then OAuth is there to protect your back-end services. And then FIDO obviously is an emerging standard. FIDO 2 is really going to be a compelling standard that we use to provide things like multi-factor and be able to prevent against phishing attacks. So let's talk about the customer profile service, very critical piece that we have built and are still evolving internally at GM. And the profile is part of this identity life cycle for customers. Critical parts of that in terms of how they come in as an authenticated experience. They do prove themselves, they identify themselves, and then we cycle them through a registration and management of their profile information. And then how we manage that profile information is really what's key for all of our back-end services, right? And being able to provide a consistent snapshot of who that customer is really the benefit that a common service layer for profile will provide. So let's talk about some of the principles that we use to design our architecture and our customer profile service. Again, this will be something that you'll need to navigate with your stakeholders in your enterprise, but there's going to be a set of common profile attributes that should go in a common enterprise service, right? And that dividing line, which may move, there needs to be governance involved in determining which user attributes are common and which are specific to a line of business. But you need to set a stake in the ground and define exactly which attributes and what customer data is going to be available to all of your services. And then allowing modifications of that profile should only come through a governed, approved enterprise service, right? You don't want your line of business applications driving changes into your common profile attributes, because that becomes almost impossible to keep in sync. The business applications should master all attributes. So that really what that third bullet is saying is that your line of business applications will need to own the attributes that are part of what the service that they provide, right? And so there's a common set of profile data that is managed at the enterprise level, and then your line of business will manage whatever is important, whether it's vehicle preferences, whether it's specific attributes about the customer that are with the service that you're providing. And within the business environment, that's where that data should be managed. It should not be managed at the enterprise level. It should be within the vertical in your enterprise. Just skipping ahead, the other architectural kind of guidance that we have focused on is that we move towards RESTful services across all of our services. So that's why, again, latching on to another point that Andre mentioned in the keynote, APIs are the key to enabling our services in the enterprise. And so we are managing as a product a set of customer profile services that will be used by all of our applications. And being able to do that is going to be key to allow kind of an easy on-ramp for our applications to be able to get access to a customer securely and to be able to provide a common set of services and then be able to provide a high quality of services to them. And then the other thing that I mentioned earlier is you want the access to that data to be through front channels, whether it's information that you put into a token, information that you can make through an API call. Back channel synchronization of data, it gets messy, it gets unreliable. And in our experience, we found that we want to stray away from that, and we want to focus more on integrating data on the front channel and allow the applications to leverage that information instead of relying on back-end data syncs. I know there's lots of products out there that can do that, but when it comes to identity data and the need for it to keep it accurate and reliable and near real time, we've really have come to not want to use that as an option. In some cases you can't help it, but you don't want to use that going forward. So let's take a look at sort of a data relationship view of how we structure our profile data. And it's key to understand that we separate the concepts of identity and account. And identity is just someone that indicates who you are, right? And there are a number of ways that an identity will get created. It could be through a CRM system. It could be through a mailing. It could be through someone who walked into a dealership and looked at a vehicle. And identity doesn't give them access to anything, but it does tell us who they are. It gives us common information about who they are. The next step from there is that they'll sign up for an account, right? They'll go into one of our online services through a mobile app, and they'll sign up for an account, and they'll create an email address that we can use to interact with them. Once that account is created, that becomes more of what we call a connected profile, right? Because now that's somebody that we can provide all of our connected services to, because now we have a verifiable email address and other critical information about them. Once they sign up for an account, then they get into our profile service, and that's where we manage that common set of attributes about the customer that now as existing business apps and new business apps come on board, they don't have to replicate that information, right? They can just plug into our service and get whatever that we know about the customer at that time, and if they have additional services that they need to provide, they can just provide an additional set that they can manage internally within their business app, and that's how we kind of provide the full picture, the kind of full end-to-end view of the customer. Another view of this same perspective is the single credential perspective. Again, identity is just an indication of who that person is. It's information about who that person is, but the credential is an actual account that's in our IDaaS service and is the real way that they access all of their applications within the enterprise. And so credential versus multiple profiles is the way that we're going for this. And it's an important distinction to understand because it's typically most of those accounts are all loaded into a single directory, and there's aspects and there's reasons why you don't want to do that. So that's the single account view. So now let's take a look at the flow that happens when we create new users. And typically within when you sign up a new user, the way that we go about it is that they already have, or they will create an identity in our identity service. What all of that is saying is we get the basic information for the person, we load that into our identity service, and now when an account gets created, we always go and verify that information in that identity service before we create an account. And so creating the account becomes a very simple step, right? If you verify them in the identity service, then we can just we allow the user to register their email or a phone number if they use for a login, and then that will create the account in our identity service, in our cloud service. And then from there, depending on which business app they signed up for, then they would get a profile created in that business application. So that's the kind of a three-step process, and even though a user sign-up flow, which could be a very simple set of capturing an email address and a password, but in doing that, there are multiple systems on the back end that have to get interacted with to be able to create an actual customer record. And so what happens then when we create and add a customer to a new application, it's a very simple step at that point, because now you have a common profile already created for them, and now you can just add them into a new business. So if they sign up for your mobile app and then they sign up for a new service, a reward service or whatever it may be, now you have a common set of information for that customer that you can propagate across your new services. So one view of the architecture, I had to provide an architecture picture. I mean, I wouldn't be an architect otherwise. So the key foundation that we wanted to set with our identity services was to be able to provide a common set of profile information. And this becomes kind of a control plane that all of our applications can use to understand what is that core information that we know about a customer, right? And so it's an API-enabled service. And all of our back office services that provide customer-facing applications interact with that service. And it's extensible. It allows us to add on critical things like as we move into managing preferences centrally, we'll be able to do that. As we add more security features, as we add more features to the platform for the customer, we'll be able to do that in one location, and then all of the back-end applications don't need to worry about, well, is MFA enabled or is vulnerability protection enabled on the front end? We handle that all in the common services layer. So just from a lessons learned perspective, it's really important that, again, everyone is mentioning how important it is to drive to standards. We have done that internally. We have actually participated on standards committees over the past 10 years, and I can't stress enough how that's a kind of table stakes, right? That's one of the main things you want to drive as part of your architecture and part of the system that you build. And governance, again, very critical that there is a communication of a strategy and that there is an expected adherence to that strategy. And so that's where there needs to be leadership support from a governance perspective when decisions on who should manage an attribute and who should be able to edit or manage attributes either locally or within the central infrastructure. It's always a inspiring discussion that we have, but a governance is really critically necessary because it ends up causing rework and issues moving forward. And then collaboration, we have weekly and even more often than that, just collaborations with our stakeholders to make sure that we are in alignment on strategy. Because again, GM, huge enterprise, everyone may not be aware of exactly where we're trying to go, and so driving a collaboration culture about where we are strategically is very important. And so that's some of the things that we've learned so far and that we continue to drive moving forward. And that is a wrap.